Hello and welcome to episode 26 of Crime Story Sunday. Now, I didn't plan to do an episode of Crime Story Sunday this week, but I came across this case and I'd never heard of it before, even though it happened less than 20 miles from where I live. And this is an old case from 1944. I've never seen anyone on YouTube cover it, and I only came across it by chance the other day. This is the unsolved disappearance of 6-year-old Sheila Fox. Let's get into it. Six-year-old Sheila Fox lived in Farnworth, which is a small district of Bolton. It's about 2 miles across, about a mile north to south. Small place, but densely populated. And it had about the same number of people, about 26,000 people living in it, in Sheila's day, as it does today. So it's very working class, very heavily populated. And this is where Sheila spent her life. Coming from a working class family, her dad was a coal miner, as was very common for working class men to work down the pit in those days. So the day is the 18th of August 1944, and it's a Friday afternoon. And it's alleged that Sheila left school around 4 p.m, which I find curious because in my lifetime, and I'm quite old, schools end for summer, latter half of July, and go back usually the first week of September. So I don't know whether it was different in 1944. I'd have to ask my mother. She was born in 1944. She would know. But my mother's not here. So we're just playing it by ear and just going from what the sources are telling us. So apparently Sheila was heading home to her house, which was on MacDonald Avenue. MacDonald Avenue is still there in Farnworth. It leads on to Bolton Road, which is going to become significant as this story continues. But I don't know how much MacDonald Avenue or Bolton Road have changed over the years, but these look like older houses, so I'm guessing that Sheila would have lived in one of these very houses. I don't know what number she lived at. And of course, 1944, the world was in the grips of World War II. World War II wasn't going to end for another year. So it would have been the days of rationing and air raids, wartime Britain. And we tend to look back on these times. I'm not old enough to look back on that specific time, but we do tend to look back at the past with rose-tinted spectacles. And we don't think that kids were in danger then like they are today. And yes, of course, there are new dangers today, like internet predators, grooming, things like that. But kids generally then, would play out on the street. They'd go out at dawn, they'd come back at dusk, they'd be dirty, they'd be muddy. They'd play out, right? Days before television, days before the internet. Kids went out and played. So this was summer's afternoon, 18th of August. Sheila out of school, playing with a couple of friends, and she never returned home. A couple of Sheila's friends were interviewed. One of them, a little girl who was aged 7, said that she'd seen Sheila walking with a man, and she'd even asked Sheila where she was going. And Sheila had said, "I'm going with this man." Now, another friend said she'd seen Sheila on a man's bike riding away with a man. And indeed, when the media got hold of this story, Sheila became known as the girl in the green Mac. She was wearing a green coat. Her parents also were able to say that that day she was wearing a blue flowered dress, brown socks and black shoes, and she had her hair tied up in a ribbon. And Sheila was very much the baby of the family. She was the youngest of 5. And she was, I guess, a typical little girl. And something else that is really crucial, I think, to this story is that her family said that she was very shy. So they couldn't believe that she would go off with a stranger, which led everybody to believe that Sheila knew this man. that this was a local man that had befriended her before. Now, the sources don't say whether the friends that saw Sheila with this man, whether they recognised him or not. We don't know that information. But that day, search parties went out. Lots of neighbours joined in. In fact, the entire community came out to look for Sheila. They looked through the air raid shelters. This was wartime. Farnworth is 8 miles from Manchester. Manchester was heavily bombed. There was air raid shelters. Perfect place to go and hide a child. Disused pit shafts. Coal mines all over the north of England in the 1940s. Sinkholes, outbuildings, hedgerows, waterways, mill lodges, as well as coal mining. Cotton mills were big back then. Fields, although they didn't have things like heat-seeking technology then, they absolutely had dogs. So they brought out bloodhounds, they brought out police dogs. But there was nothing. Throughout that weekend, the county police were joined by air raid wardens, army cadets, as the search was stepped up. Their hunt went on day and night throughout that weekend, just unbroken. Everybody went out to look for Sheila, and she was nowhere to be seen. The Bolton Evening News, which is still a thing, the Bolton News is still a newspaper, and they really publicised this missing little girl wearing a green coat and ribbons in her hair. And some readers came forward to say that they had seen a child matching Sheila's description on the crossbar of a bike being ridden by a man. And that's exactly the same information that one of Sheila's friends had told the police and Sheila's family on the night she disappeared. By the end of August, several cyclists who had given rides to children, either their own kids or a neighbour's kid or whatever, had been identified and had been ruled out. There was just one cyclist who had not, who they could not track down. This man had been seen riding on Newbrook Road. Now, Newbrook Road takes you out of Farnworth towards Atherton and Lee. And it was a woman who saw a younger man riding a bike down Newbrook Road towards Atherton, so riding away from Farnworth, with a little girl, matching Sheila's description. The man that Sheila was allegedly with was described as being between 25 and 30 years old, with a slim build, clean-shaven and well-dressed, with a navy blue suit and a blue and red tie. So very specific description. This woman got a really good look at this man. She alleged that she saw him between 4 and 4:30 on the day that Sheila disappeared. If Sheila was walking home at 4, I would imagine that for him to be cycling towards Atherton at that time, it would have to be closer to 4:30. But other people had said that they had seen this man earlier in the vicinity of Atherton Parish Church. So was he local to Atherton? Did he know Atherton? Atherton's a small place. It's still quite a small place in between Bolton and kind of Lee, Wigan area. Now, Sheila's older sister Betty gave the family and the police some kind of level of hope that at least Sheila was still alive, because Betty said that she remembers one time, about 3 months before Sheila disappeared, she remembers a young couple commenting to Sheila about how beautiful she was. She's never seen them before or since, but they commented to Sheila on how lovely she was, and they said they'd like to take her with them. Betty said that this couple sounded like they were Southerners, right? Different accent to the Bolton accent. Bolton accent is very similar to mine. Enquiries were made, but nothing came of it. And maybe that was just a couple who just thought Sheila was lovely and said something nice to her, and Sheila was very shy, so they just, they were just nice. But the case went completely cold. That is until 2001, right? So this happened in 1944, and a tip came in 2001. But the garden of a known sex offender on Barton Road. MacDonald Avenue turns into Barton Road. And remember that Sheila was very shy. So perhaps her family were right. This had to be someone that she knew. She would not have gone off willingly with someone unless she really knew them. They might have been able to pick her up and drag her away, but she'd have been screaming. She wouldn't have voluntarily gone with him. So this tip came in, and an address on Barton Road was searched for Sheila's remains. This man was called Richard Ryan, and his family, who no longer live there, and the person that lives there now is completely unconnected to this case at all, but you know, they gave permission for this search to be made, for their entire garden to be dug up. And this tip that took till 2001 to come in was that this person, who was only a youngster at the time, remembers seeing a man digging in the backyard of this house on Barton Road after midnight. It would have been the early hours of the Saturday morning, within hours of Sheila disappearing. The thing, though, about Richard Ryan is that in 1950, just 6 years after Sheila disappeared, Richard Ryan was convicted of rape, and he was living in that house with his mother and his younger brother in 1950 when he was arrested and charged with rape. In 1965, he was also charged, convicted of sexually assaulting another child. But he subsequently married and had a son of his own. And the family of Richard Ryan, who was dead by that point, he'd been dead about 12 years in 2001, said that they were shocked at Richard being implicated in Sheila's disappearance. A close relative of Richard said, "I hope that they find Sheila's body, but they won't find it in that garden." And in 2001, Richard Ryan's wife was still alive. I don't know whether she still is. She'll be a very old lady if so. She was having health problems back then, and although she refused to talk about the search, she said that her husband was a good man and he was always good to her and her family. The excavation of this backyard lasted for 4 days, and Detective Chief Inspector Paul Buchanan said, "It is a slow, methodical process. We have 2 forensic anthropologists going through the ground layer by layer." So imagine it being very much the same type of excavation that they did on that backyard of Red Wing Street in Fruitland, Idaho, you know, in the search for 5-year-old Michael Vaughan. We took advice from experts about the best way of examining the area, and technological methods such as ground-penetrating radar were discontinued due to the size of the area involved and the age of the incident. No evidence whatsoever that a child or anyone had been buried in that garden came to light. Would there have been something there if that tip had been reported sooner? I don't know. But from that fateful day in August 1944, Sheila vanished and has never been seen again. Sheila would be in her 80s now. She would have lived an entire life and be a very old lady if she hadn't have been taken on that fateful day on the 18th of August 1944. She'd have had her whole life, and that was taken. We're probably never going to get answers to what happened to 6-year-old Sheila Fox. But it just shows you that these really old cases, sometimes somebody sends in a tip years and years later. Unfortunately, in this case, it didn't result in a find, but it could have done. And I think that gives me a little bit of hope for cases where we're losing hope. Like Summer Wells, Michael Vaughan, we lose hope, but we shouldn't, because one day that one tip could make all the difference and it could bring that lost person home. Let me know what you think in the comments, and I'll see you very soon in the next episode of Crime Stories Sunday. And I'll be back, of course, tomorrow with the usual video. Bye, guys. What have you done?